Hey everybody. Arrays are a good unit of storage, but sometimes an array might not be enough. And let me give you a scenario uh, where I can explain what I'm talking about. So if you have a student and they have um, a a bunch of tests, you might have an array to store those tests. But sometimes you might have more complex needs to work with your data. Maybe you have multiple students and every student has a bunch of tests. Well, a single array would not be able to store a series of tests for several students, in which case a two-dimensional array would be a good uh, structure to store your data in. The way that we are taught to understand two-dimensional arrays is by visualizing a table. And so I went ahead and put a simple table together that could help you visualize the storage unit that we're working with here, which is a two-dimensional array. We have rows and columns again, so it creates a table, and each row, for example, row 0 would represent student 1. Each row represents the student, and each column could represent the test. So at the intersection, student 1 might have received, maybe student 1 is our A student, so 95, 97, 92, and 100. Student 2 didn't quite study as much, and they got a 40 or 45. They studied real hard on this test, so they got a 97. And then they somehow missed every single question on that test. And then student 3, we could just say they're our B student, so we'll throw in some values here. And so there is one storage unit that we can use to store all of these values, and that would be a multi-dimensional array. Now, the way you declare a multi-dimensional array, so let's start with declaring a two-dimensional array, not a multi. I did say multi, but we're only working with two dimensions right now. Would be as so. You now have two brackets, and we'll call our identifier uh, students, student tests equals new double. Now, inside of the second set of braces, we need to define how many rows and how many columns. So we do that. Let's say in our scenario, the number of rows is 3. So let's go back here, and the first set of braces is the number of rows, and the number of columns, if we go back to our Word document, was 4. There were 4 columns and 3 rows. And so that's how we declare a two-dimensional array. Now, how do we initialize it? Well, student tests, we give it a row and we give it a column equals some value. So in our example, 95 was row 0, column 0. So 0, 0, and is given the value of 95. Student tests, row 0, column 1. Row 0's here, column 1's here, so it should be 97. And I can copy this, paste it a few more times. For just by changing the column, 92 and 100. And to copy this, now all we're changing is the row. So what I'm going to say is row is represented by the first bracket. Columns are represented by the second bracket. So to change the row, we're going to change the first bracket, and we're going to change the values here to 40, 45, 97, and this is the one that they bombed with a 0. And let's go ahead and create another row which represents our third student. So for me, it's important to always try and visualize it. Always try and visualize the table, because it helps you understand this storage, the way that we store our information here in this two-dimensional array. And our third student, we said 88, 79, 83, and 71, excuse me. So declare and initialize, and to print it out. So let's using a two-dimensional array in output. So, you know, in initializing, I did this very manually. You could definitely write a loop for input, and you could write a loop for output. I could put each one of these in a print line statement, and I could say something like system out print line student test 0 sub 0, right, in the output, and I could do that for each one of these. But instead, I'm going to show you how to use a loop, and keeping in mind you can use a loop for input and output. And we're going to be using loops a lot with two-dimensional arrays to help us from typing so much. So if I demonstrate this, you could see that 0 sub 0, as you might expect, is 95. But let's instead use a loop. And because there are rows and columns, we're going to have nested loops, one for the row, one for the column. So we're going to start int I equals 0, I less than I less than student test dot length I plus plus. Now student test dot length is equal to the number of rows. So in this scenario, we know that the number of rows is 3. So we're going to be looping 0, 1, and 2. So this represents our rows, this for loop, the outer for loop. And then we're going to have an inner for loop. And this is going to represent our column, so I named our variable call student test sub I dot length. Now I is representing our row, so this particular statement gets the length of the row, or the number of columns in that row. Call plus plus. And to have the same naming convention, I'm going to change I up here to row to help you understand that this represents the row, and then this represents the number of columns in that row. Well, row is less than students. So we're using nested for loops in the output, and we'll do a system out print line student test row sub call. And if we print these out, you can see 95, 97, 92, 100. That's our first student. 40, 45, 97, and 0. 88, 79. So using nested loops, we can output all of our values inside of our two-dimensional array. Since we have a little bit more time on this video, I want to go ahead and sum all the elements of a two-dimensional array. And to get the sum is a very similar process with a running total or an accumulator. And so let's go ahead and declare our total equal to 0 for our accumulator. And instead of printing out each value, let's just say total plus equals. And then print it out. So all these numbers added together, if we needed them, would be 887. Now, a more likely scenario would be the average, right? Then to get the average of all the elements in a two-dimensional array, really all you have to do is say double average equals, let's cast our total divided by the number of elements in the two-dimensional. Now to get the number of elements in a two-dimensional array, I'm just going to create a counter, and then each iteration here we're going to increment count. So then we'll just divide by count. And that way we get the total number divided by the count of elements. Now let's print out the average. So 887 is our total, and 73.916667 is our average. Okay, we have a few more operations that we can do with two-dimensional arrays, which we will get to in the next video, but here's a good introduction of what is a two-dimensional array, how is it used, how do you put data in, how do you get data out, how do you sum the elements, how do you find the average of the elements, and like I said, there's a few more operations in the next video.